Welcome to another video lecture for Mr. Moser's 8th grade U.S. History class. Today's topic will be looking at kind of the beginnings of the Constitutional Convention. The textbook readings that go along with this particular video lecture are Chapter 5, Section 3, and Chapter 6, Section 1. So pages 163 to 168, and then 182 to 186. You'll see a lot of overlap in some of these textbook readings, as we'll do multiple video lectures that will cover multiple different topics addressed within those different reading sections. The guiding questions for this particular video lecture are: what was the Constitutional Convention, kind of the when, where, why important? What issues united and divided the delegates? What is a republic? Who was elected to preside over the convention? Who was the oldest delegate at the convention? What type of jobs did most of the delegates have? Who was known as the father of the Constitution? And why did they all take a vow of secrecy? So let's talk here a little bit about the Constitutional Convention. The Constitutional Convention takes place and begins on May 25th, 1787 at what we would call today Independence Hall. At the time it was known as the Philadelphia State House in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania. Remember, this is just a few months after the failed Shays Rebellion. So the whole country was sort of in an uproar after Shays' failed rebellion, and there was a lot of concern that this new nation of ours was on the verge of collapse. So 55 delegates from 12 states. The one state that doesn't send any delegates will be Rhode Island. They kind of have a little bit of an independent streak, and they didn't think there was a need to change the government, so they don't send anybody. But the other 12 states do send delegates, 55 in total, to kind of meet in this convention in Philadelphia at the Philadelphia State House to kind of discuss the problems and flaws of the Articles of Confederation, and to see what might be the best course of action to fix these issues that the nation was facing with the problems with Great Britain and Spain, with the trade that was happening and the blocking of trade that was happening with those two nations, the inflation, the cost of goods going up and the value of money going down, and of course you have Shays' Rebellion and these rebellions beginning to gain traction. So there's a lot of concern, and so they send their best and brightest. These are the founding fathers, these gentlemen who we give this nickname to. You know, they kind of sound like the Avengers or the Justice League, and that's kind of how people viewed them even that period too, that these were some of the best and brightest the country had to offer, and if they can't solve this problem, who possibly can solve this problem? So they meet starting in May of 1787. They'll meet for 18 weeks, all the way up until September of that same year, to basically look at the Articles of Confederation, and it was quickly decided that these are junk. Time to get rid of them. They don't work very well, and so they're going to replace them with something new that we're going to call our Constitution, which is how our current government operates today. And so that will be what we'll be exploring as we go in through future lectures. The Constitutional Convention had some things that the delegates agreed on, and there are some things they didn't really agree on. The things the delegates all agreed on were that people's rights of life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness were very important to protect. Those are our natural rights that we're born with, and government should really try and protect us of those rights. And then the second thing was that the best type of government we should have as a country would be a republic. A republic is a system of government where the people choose the people to represent them. That's how our society works today. Our local school board is elected by our community members in our school district to decide policy issues involving the school. Our city mayor and city council are elected by the citizens of our fair city to look at the issues facing our city and make decisions for us on our behalf. They are our representatives. They speak for us because we have lives, we're busy, we can't make decisions on every major issue facing us. So all the founding fathers generally agree that a Republican form of government would be the best form. Now, anytime you get people together, you're going to have some disagreements. 55 of them in particularly, there are going to be some pretty heated arguments, which were pretty common during these 18 weeks of the convention. One of the biggest controversies was who should vote and hold office, and probably the biggest controversy was who should have the most power in this new government. Once it was decided to get rid of the Articles of Confederation, very quickly the question became, well, who should have more say in this new country of ours? Should it be the federal or national government, or should most of the power still reside in the states? And this is still an issue that we are still dealing with today as a country, is what is that proper balance between the states having some power and the federal government having some power? So this is what the room looked like back in 1787. If you visit Independence Hall today, it looks just like this. They've kind of set it up to look like it did back in 1787. The delegates were situated in desks by kind of their state and who they're representing. You'll notice a lot of candles because they would work late into the nights. This is before there was electricity. And you see the table there in the far back there. That's the presidential chair who will preside over the entire convention. So who did they elect for president? Well, there was really a no-brainer here, and that was George Washington. He will be elected as the president of the convention. He was a pop star icon in America in 1787. He was very respected by all Americans. He had a lot of street cred for winning the revolution. People really respected the man and what he did during the crisis of the American Revolutionary War. Getting him at the convention was one of the biggest points of some of the delegates. They really wanted him there because they knew his presence would give a lot of weight to the American public. This was something serious. If George is backing it, this is something that we should probably back as well. So that's kind of why they wanted George there and why they kind of elected him. All the men that were there greatly respected him. Who was the oldest delegate? Well, the oldest delegate was a young, spry Ben Franklin at 81. He was 81 years old. He was by far the oldest delegate. He had lived so much and had done so much for the development of our country during the Revolutionary War, and then afterwards, he still came as a delegate from Pennsylvania. He was carried in every day by a group of prisoners in the local nearby prison because he had horrible gout and leg problems, so he couldn't walk very well. So they would bring him in every day. He would sit in his recliner. He was known to once in a while fall asleep, but every once in a while he would wake up and make some very important points. The average age of most of the delegates was in their young 40s. So at the time, 40 was seasoned, but for us today, as someone who's approaching 40, that's not that old, but 41 was about their average age. What was their occupation? Most of them were lawyers, which again, if you're making laws, you probably should know kind of the basis of how laws work. And so most of them were actually lawyers. You had a few who were businessmen and merchants, and those like George Washington who were planters or farmers by trade. And that kind of rounded out the majority of them, of what kind of occupations they had. Who's the father of the Constitution? Well, this will be James Madison, and we'll kind of explore this in a future lecture, but a lot of his ideas of what this new government should look like kind of come from Madison's brain. He did a lot of research about government before coming to the convention. He was kind of a bookworm, loved reading, and so he had some ideas and some notions, and he presented a lot of these notions at the convention, and it took hold and becomes a lot of what becomes in the Constitution. So we kind of give him the name of the father of the Constitution. Another really important thing about James Madison is that he took a lot of notes, about 800 pages roughly of notes throughout the convention. And that's how we know so much what took place during the convention. He took notes on what people said, what the debates were, what the arguments were. So which as historians is fascinating as we can go back and look at his notes and we can kind of see the progression of the convention, things that were being discussed and debated, where some of the arguments were at, and how they came up with some compromises. So his contribution to the Constitution was extremely important, and his record of his notes are also a lasting legacy for us of this generation of Americans to know what happened. The last piece is this vow of secrecy. All the delegates swore that they would not speak outside of what was happening inside this convention. The biggest worry was the public might catch wind of what they were doing, and then public pressure would be placed upon them. They wanted to have an open forum where they could freely speak their minds without pressure from outside forces. So they all took a vow of secrecy not to spill the beans until the convention was over. Once the convention ended, then they could go back to their states and explain what they went through, the process, and what they came up with. But during the convention, and George Washington took this very seriously, even kind of yelling at the delegates on one day, saying, "We have to keep this quiet. We do not want outside pressure." So thank you for listening to this video lecture. As always, if you have questions or concerns, make sure you come talk to your teacher.